Now, you're face to face with the opportunity of a lifetime, the CEO role at one of the most prestigious companies in the industry. The interview goes as well as it can, but something in the air shifts. There's a hint of doubt, a glance exchanged, a nervous shuffle of papers. And when it's over, you leave, knowing in your gut that it didn't go the way you hoped. Now, picture this. A week later, you receive a call. It's the company, but not for the position you thought. They want you back. They want you to be the next CEO. The very role you thought you had lost, because they saw something in you, something no one else did. How is this even possible? How does someone go from being rejected to being the very person they once thought was not the right fit? Today, you're about to uncover the shocking truth of one of the most unexpected career turnarounds ever. You've clicked on this video for a reason. Maybe it's because you've faced rejection yourself, and deep down, you're hoping for a story of someone who has turned failure into triumph. Maybe it's because you're struggling with your own career, wondering if the next opportunity is ever going to come knocking. Or maybe, just maybe, you're someone who dreams of being at the very top of your game, the CEO, the leader, the one who calls the shots. Whatever your reason, you're here now, and you won't want to miss a second of what's coming next. Stick with me, because I'm about to take you through a journey that will make you question everything you think you know about success, failure, and second chances. This is not your typical story of hard work paying off or following the traditional route to success. This is a story of rejection, doubt, and the unbelievable twist of fate that changed everything. But first, let's meet the woman at the heart of this remarkable journey. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah had always dreamed of leadership. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, one rung at a time, proving herself in every department, mastering every role. She had that unique combination of intelligence, charisma, and drive. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately commanded attention. Yet, for all her talents, there was always a sense that something was missing. The title of CEO seemed so far out of reach, something that belonged to people with more experience, more connections, or perhaps even more luck. When the CEO position at a major global company opened up, Sarah knew this was her shot. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about. She applied with a sense of excitement and hope, knowing that this was her moment to shine. But then came the day of the interview, the day that would change the course of her career. She entered the room, fully prepared. She had researched every facet of the company, had answers to every potential question, and had even prepared a vision for where she saw the company in 5 years. But as the interview unfolded, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The questions came slower than she expected. The body language of the interviewers, once warm and open, became colder, more distant. The energy in the room shifted. She did her best to stay composed, answering each question with confidence, but by the end of the interview, the writing was on the wall. It wasn't the rejection she expected, there were no harsh words or direct no's. Instead, it was the way they ended it, the polite smiles and the vague promises of getting back to her soon. She left the office with a sinking feeling, the kind of feeling you get when you know you've put your heart into something and it just wasn't enough. She tried to push it out of her mind, but the rejection stung. She kept telling herself it wasn't the end, that there were other opportunities, but deep down, she couldn't help but feel that this was the one that mattered most. But then came the unexpected twist. A week later, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was the company. Her stomach dropped. Was this just another polite rejection, or was there something else? They asked her to come in for another meeting, but this time, the conversation took a completely different turn. They told her that they had reconsidered her application. They said they had seen something in her that they didn't initially recognize. She hadn't been right for the position she originally applied for, but they wanted her to be the CEO. The very role she had walked away from thinking was lost to her forever. How could this happen? How could someone go from being rejected to being called back as the top contender for the most powerful position in the company? What had changed in the eyes of the interviewers? Was it really Sarah's rejection that led to this shocking reversal of fortune, or was there something else at play here? And most importantly, what would she do now that the offer was on the table? This is where the story gets even more interesting. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that this was not just a story of chance. It wasn't a fluke or a random act of kindness from the company. This was the result of something much deeper, the company's recognition of potential and the ability to see beyond the surface level. It was the realization that Sarah possessed qualities that went beyond her qualifications on paper. There was something about her, her vision, her resilience, her ability to inspire those around her that made her the perfect fit for the role of CEO. But that doesn't mean the journey was smooth. The moment she was offered the CEO role, Sarah found herself facing a new set of challenges. She had to prove herself not just to the company, but to the very people who had initially doubted her. The pressure was immense. Could she really step into the role of CEO after being rejected once? Could she convince everyone that she was the right choice for the job, or would she be seen as an outsider, an imposter who didn't belong in the position of power? This is the part where most people would quit. It's the point where doubt creeps in, where the fear of failure takes hold. But not Sarah. She saw this as her second chance, her opportunity to prove that rejection wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger. She dove into the role with everything she had, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. And so, Sarah's journey as CEO began not with a grand, flawless entrance, but with a hard-fought battle against her own doubts and the skepticism of others. But in the end, it was the very rejection that had once seemed like a devastating blow that gave her the strength to rise up and lead. So, what does this story teach us? It's a powerful reminder that rejection is not always the end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. And sometimes, the most unexpected twists in our careers can lead to the greatest victories. But Sarah's journey didn't stop there, and the real test of her leadership was only just beginning. You're probably wondering, what happened next? Did she rise to the challenge, or did the weight of her new role prove too much? Stick around, because you won't believe how this story unfolds. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss the next part of Sarah's journey. Sarah had always prided herself on being the kind of person who didn't need anyone's validation to push forward. From a young age, she had learned that the road to success was a solitary one that required grit, resilience, and a relentless drive. She had earned her place in the business world, not by relying on connections or favors, but by constantly proving herself in every role she took on. Her colleagues respected her, her mentors saw her as a rising star. But, for all her determination, there was something lurking in the back of her mind, the nagging feeling that despite all her achievements, she was never truly seen. There was always someone who seemed to be one step ahead, always someone who had the perfect timing or the right people backing them up. And that, in a way, was the source of her deepest fear, being overlooked. It wasn't just about the CEO role. It was everything leading up to it. Sarah had been working at the company for over 5 years. She had started as an analyst, climbing the ranks quickly due to her sharp mind and ability to solve problems that others struggled with. She'd proven herself in the trenches, taking on every challenge with the kind of determination that made her a natural leader. But there was always this subtle undercurrent in the office, a sense that she wasn't part of the inner circle. In a world dominated by networks and relationships, Sarah often found herself working harder than her peers to prove that she belonged, even though the results spoke for themselves. She had heard the whispers, the quiet conversations in hallways, and the jokes about her lack of social finesse. Some colleagues, especially the more senior ones, seemed to view her as a bit of an outsider, too focused on the job and not enough on building alliances. In their eyes, she wasn't a part of the elite group that made the real decisions, she was just a cog in the wheel. The rejection from the CEO interview had felt like the culmination of all of that, an official acknowledgement that, despite all her efforts, she wasn't quite ready. She wasn't the one. But as Sarah pondered over the details of that meeting, she realized something she hadn't considered at first. The rejection wasn't just an impersonal no. The way they had handled it, the polite smiles, the lack of direct feedback, didn't sit right with her. It was almost as if they were trying to tell her something without saying it outright. It wasn't a sharp, final no, it was a suggestion to try again next time, as though they knew they would be seeing her again. The whole situation felt off. And it didn't end with that call. Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been pulling strings behind the scenes. She didn't have proof, but her gut told her there was more to the story than a simple rejection. Was the CEO role always meant for her? Or had something changed? Had someone else, perhaps someone close to the top, been pushing for her? She began to wonder if there were other forces at play, forces she had never seen, but that had been quietly guiding her path. The company had recently undergone some major shifts at the executive level. The CEO who had been in place for over a decade was stepping down, and there had been whispers in the boardroom about new leadership, new directions. Sarah had noticed the changes happening quietly in the background, new people coming in, old faces disappearing. A sudden restructuring here, a closed-door meeting there. The atmosphere had shifted, and she couldn't help but feel that the corporate culture was becoming increasingly secretive. Was this part of a larger strategy to bring in fresh blood? Or was something else going on? The idea of being handed the CEO position suddenly felt less like a promotion and more like a puzzle piece that had been carefully placed into a larger, more complex picture. But there was more. As Sarah thought about the people who had been part of her professional circle, a few names stood out. One was Amanda, a fellow executive who had always been supportive, but Sarah had started to notice something strange about her lately. Amanda had always been a bit distant, always polite, but never truly warm. There was a professionalism about her that bordered on coldness. It wasn't until after Sarah's rejection that Amanda seemed to take a particular interest in her. She started to show up at all the right moments, offering help with projects, lending a hand when Sarah was juggling deadlines, and even casually dropping comments about how unfortunate it was that Sarah hadn't gotten the CEO role. But was Amanda genuinely trying to help, or was there something more to her sudden kindness? Was it possible that Amanda knew something Sarah didn't? Was she part of the group that had pushed for Sarah to take on the role, or was she just playing the game in her own way? Then there was David, a longtime colleague who had always been the life of the office, charming, charismatic, with the kind of relationships that seemed to open doors for him everywhere. David had never seemed threatened by Sarah's ambition. In fact, he'd always been supportive in a friendly, almost brotherly way. But as the CEO opportunity loomed larger, Sarah couldn't ignore the strange undercurrent that had developed between them. It started with small comments, the way he'd joke about her taking over the company one day, as if it were an inevitable thing. It felt like a compliment at first, but after the interview, Sarah began to wonder if there was more to David's words than she'd realized. Did he know something? Had he been tipped off about the decision before it happened? Or was he just playing along with the office politics, quietly positioning himself as a potential ally in a world where everyone was out for power? Sarah was now facing a delicate balancing act. On one hand, the offer to become CEO was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, one that most people could only dream of. But on the other hand, everything about the way it had unfolded felt manufactured. There was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple career move. It felt like she was being pulled into something much bigger than she had bargained for. The question wasn't just whether she could do the job, of course, she could. The question was whether she could trust the process, whether she could trust the people around her. As she pondered her next steps, she realized something chilling. The more she uncovered about the people around her, the less certain she became about who her true allies were. Was the company offering her the position out of genuine respect for her abilities? Or was there a hidden agenda that she hadn't yet uncovered? Every conversation, every interaction, felt laced with layers of tension and unspoken motives. She was no longer sure who to trust, and she had a growing sense that she was being watched by people who were hoping to see her fail. The deeper Sarah delved into the mystery, the more she realized that the answers she sought were right in front of her. But as the walls closed in, the question lingered: who was behind the offer, and what did they want from her? Was this truly her chance to prove herself, or was it a carefully orchestrated move to put her in a position where failure was inevitable? As Sarah stood at the crossroads of her career, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything, her rejection, her second chance, the people around her, was all connected in ways that only the most powerful players in the room understood. And as much as she wanted to take control of her future, she knew that the real game was just beginning. But what she didn't know was just how high the stakes were, or how dangerous the players at the table could be. Stay with me, because the story is about to take an even darker turn. The truth behind Sarah's rise to the CEO position is more complex, and more dangerous, than she ever could have imagined. And the clock is ticking. As Sarah's curiosity began to grow, so did the weight of the mystery surrounding the sudden offer to become CEO. She had made the decision to take the role, but deep down, she couldn't let go of the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The pieces of the puzzle just didn't seem to fit together. Every time she thought she had uncovered something, a new layer of uncertainty would emerge. She couldn't escape the feeling that the offer wasn't as simple as it seemed. There was more at play here, something deeper, something that might just unravel everything she had worked for. One morning, while sifting through the paperwork left behind from the interview process, Sarah made a chilling discovery. In a small, seemingly innocuous folder, she found a document that hadn't been included in any of the previous meetings. It was a list of potential candidates for the CEO position, names she recognized, names she didn't, but what caught her attention was the section labeled Final Recommendation. At the bottom of the page was her name, circled in red ink. But it wasn't just that. The margins were filled with notes that seemed to suggest the role wasn't really hers yet, that someone else had been the preferred choice. The handwriting wasn't familiar, but it was clear this wasn't meant to be seen by her. This document had been hidden, deliberately misplaced. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. Was this evidence of a power struggle, of someone trying to manipulate the process and make her believe the position was hers? Or was it an attempt to create doubt in her mind, to make her question everything she thought she knew? She took a deep breath, carefully folded the document back into the folder, and locked it away. But the sense of unease lingered. She couldn't ignore it, someone wanted her to stay in the dark. But who? And why? Later that afternoon, as Sarah was preparing for an important meeting with her new executive team, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Amanda, the colleague who had been so supportive after the rejection, the one who had seemed almost too eager to help. Amanda had always been a steady presence in the office, a voice of reason when things got chaotic. She was, in many ways, the office's glue, a person everyone trusted. So when Amanda showed up at Sarah's office, leaning against the doorframe with a concerned expression, Sarah didn't think twice. "Amanda, what's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying the tension she was feeling. Amanda glanced around the room, almost nervously, before stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Listen, Sarah," she began, lowering her voice. "I know you've been digging into some things about the CEO offer, the interviews, all that. I just need to warn you." She paused, as though weighing her words. "You need to stop looking into this. It's complicated. And the more you dig, the more you're going to regret it." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? I have a right to know what's going on, especially now that I'm the CEO." Amanda's face twisted with what Sarah could only describe as fear. "You think you're in control, but you're not. You're a pawn in a much bigger game, and there are people who don't want you to know what's really going on behind the scenes." Amanda's voice trembled slightly, though she tried to mask it. "I'm just telling you this because I care about you. You're going to regret it if you keep pushing." Sarah stood there, stunned. Was Amanda warning her out of genuine concern, or was there something darker at play? The tension in the room grew thick as Sarah tried to read her colleague's face. The offer to become CEO wasn't just a career step, it was now a potential trap, and Amanda seemed to know something she wasn't saying. Was she trying to protect Sarah, or was she trying to hide something? "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Why not earlier?" Amanda looked away, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "Because I didn't know how deep this went until recently. I thought it was just business, just the usual politics. But now, I see things differently. Some things should just stay buried." Before Sarah could press her further, Amanda turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah standing there with more questions than answers. What had Amanda meant by that? Why had she acted so strangely? Was Amanda truly trying to help, or was she simply trying to control the narrative, to stop Sarah from uncovering the truth? Over the next few days, Sarah tried to focus on the role she had been thrust into. She was determined to prove herself after all. This was what she had worked for, what she had fought for. But every decision she made, every move she took, felt like it was being watched, monitored. It wasn't just the weight of the CEO position that pressed down on her shoulders, it was the realization that there were forces at play, forces that didn't want her in power. The subtle hints of sabotage were starting to surface. Files were going missing from her office, sensitive documents she had prepared for her first board meeting seemed to vanish without a trace. It wasn't just coincidence anymore, someone was deliberately trying to keep her in the dark. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Sarah decided to investigate further. She headed to the company's storage room, a place that held records from previous executive decisions, files from past interviews, and other confidential materials. She had a key, but she'd never really had a reason to use it until now. As she scoured through the boxes, searching for anything that might provide more answers, she found something that made her blood run cold: a small, unmarked envelope tucked between two large files. Inside was a single photograph, an old one, faded and creased. It was a picture of Sarah at an event she barely remembered, a charity gala from years ago. She was standing next to a man she didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulder, both of them smiling for the camera. But it wasn't just the stranger in the photo that made Sarah's heart race, it was the name written on the back of the photo: David. The same David who had always been so supportive, the same one who had been there every step of the way. The same David who had made cryptic comments about her future. Why was he in a photo with her from an event she had never attended? And why was it tucked away, hidden in a place where only the highest levels of management would have access? Suddenly, everything felt wrong. David, Amanda, the missing documents, all of it pointed to a much darker conspiracy than she had ever imagined. As she stood there, staring at the photo, she knew one thing for certain: someone had been orchestrating her rise to CEO from the shadows. But the question now wasn't who had been pulling the strings, it was why. As Sarah raced to make sense of this new piece of the puzzle, she couldn't help but wonder, had she been chosen for this role because of her skills, or was she being manipulated for something much larger than she could ever understand? And who else, in the depths of the company, was playing this dangerous game? Stay tuned. The twists are only beginning, and the stakes are higher than ever. The truth is just within reach, but will Sarah be able to uncover it before it's too late? As Sarah paced back and forth in her office, her mind racing with the discovery of the photograph, she could feel the walls closing in around her. The unsettling realization that David had been in her life in ways she hadn't fully understood began to gnaw at her. How could she have missed something so crucial? But just as she thought she might begin to unravel the mystery, something unexpected happened, something that would send her spiraling even further into uncertainty. It came in the form of an email, late one night. Sarah had been reviewing her calendar, planning her next steps, when the alert popped up on her screen. At first glance, it seemed like just another routine message. But the subject line, "You're not the only one being watched," sent a jolt of panic through her. Without wasting another second, she clicked it open. The email was from an address she didn't recognize, but the content was chilling. It was a single sentence, with no greeting, no signature, just a cryptic warning: "They're looking at you. They're also looking at someone close to you. Don't trust anyone." The message didn't make sense, but the implication was clear: someone knew that Sarah had been digging deeper into the strange happenings at her company, and now, they were threatening her. But why mention someone close to her? Who could it be? Was the person in question someone in her inner circle, or was it someone from her past? And what did they mean? Who was this mysterious group that seemed to have their eyes on her every move? Her gut instinct told her it wasn't just a random threat. This was calculated. Someone wanted her to stop, to leave the puzzle unsolved. But just as Sarah was about to respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was a blocked number, but something in the back of her mind told her that she couldn't afford to ignore it. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Hello." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, but then the voice spoke, low and deliberately calm. "Sarah, this is going to sound strange, but you need to listen to me carefully. Someone's after you. Someone you trust. I can't tell you who, but you have to be careful. You're not alone in this." Before Sarah could ask any questions, the line went dead. She sat there, frozen, staring at the phone in disbelief. What was happening? Who was this? Was it an ally trying to warn her, Or was it someone trying to manipulate her even further? As the days went by, Sarah's sense of unease grew, and just when she thought things couldn't get any stranger, the situation escalated even more. Late one evening, as she was walking to her car, she noticed someone standing near the parking lot, just a few feet away, shrouded in shadows. The person was barely visible, but their posture seemed familiar, too familiar. As Sarah's heart raced, she took a cautious step forward, trying to make out their face in the dim light. Then, suddenly, they stepped forward into the glow of a nearby street lamp. It was Amanda. But it wasn't just Amanda standing there. There was something in her hand, a thick folder, one that looked like it had been through years of handling. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. Sarah's stomach churned as she approached, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just a casual encounter. "Amanda," Sarah called, her voice trembling, but trying to keep calm. Amanda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held up the folder, her hands shaking. "I didn't want to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep it from you any longer. There are things happening here that you don't understand, things that go back further than you could imagine. They've been watching you, Sarah. All of you." The mention of all of you struck Sarah like a blow to the chest. All of you, who else was involved? Was Amanda referring to Sarah's entire team, or was it something more personal? Was Amanda involved in this web of manipulation, or was she just another pawn? "Who's they, Amanda?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "Who's pulling the strings?" Amanda shook her head, looking over her shoulder nervously, as if making sure no one was listening. "I can't say more right now. But trust me, Sarah, you need to be careful. You're being used. Everything that's happened, the CEO offer, the way you were chosen, it's all been orchestrated from the start. You're part of a bigger plan, and you're not going to like what you find out." Sarah felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. This wasn't just a corporate power struggle. This wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. There were forces in motion that she couldn't see, forces that seemed determined to control her every move. But what was their ultimate goal? And how deep did this conspiracy run? Before Sarah could ask another question, Amanda abruptly turned, clutching the folder tightly to her chest. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't help you anymore. You're on your own." Without another word, she walked briskly away, disappearing into the night. Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling completely isolated, as if the ground beneath her was shifting with every step she took. The world she thought she knew was no longer what it seemed. There was a hidden agenda at play, one that seemed far more sinister than she could have imagined. And now, she had no idea who she could trust. But just as she was about to make her way back to her car, she noticed something strange, a small slip of paper, crumpled up on the ground near where Amanda had been standing. It was almost as if someone had dropped it in haste. Sarah picked it up, unfolding it carefully. It was a single word, scrawled in dark ink, unfinished. What did that mean? Why had Amanda dropped this? Was it a clue, or was it another warning, another piece of the puzzle meant to throw Sarah off course? As Sarah made her way home that night, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her like a lead blanket. The clues were stacking up, but they weren't leading her to clear answers. Instead, they were clouding the waters, making her question everything she thought she knew. She had no idea who was behind the game being played at her expense, but she knew one thing for sure: there was something much bigger at play here. Something darker. And if she was going to survive, she would have to trust no one, not even herself. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became, and with every step, the web of deceit seemed to grow tighter around her. Would she ever be able to break free, or would she be swallowed whole by the very forces that had set their sights on her from the start? The truth was closer than she thought. But as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, she began to wonder if discovering it would be her undoing. The next few days after Amanda's cryptic warning were a blur of confusion and mounting anxiety for Sarah. Every step she took felt like it was being watched, every phone call a potential trap, every conversation laced with hidden meanings she couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't just the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her gut, it was the growing sense that she was in over her head. The mysteries that had once seemed like puzzles to solve were now becoming a suffocating reality, and Sarah couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. But as much as she wanted to walk away from it all, she knew she couldn't. The truth, whatever it was, had her trapped. Late one evening, after a long day of trying to stay focused on her duties as CEO, Sarah found herself walking out of the office building with a heavy heart. The streets were quieter than usual, the night air crisp against her skin. She pulled her coat tighter around her, almost as if the cold could shield her from the creeping dread that had settled in her chest. As she neared her car, a familiar sense of unease washed over her. Something wasn't right. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, a primal instinct telling her she wasn't alone. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty. Still, the feeling lingered, she wasn't alone. As she reached for the door handle of her car, she froze. The passenger side window was slightly cracked open, just enough for someone to have slipped something inside. Her pulse quickened. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled the door open slowly. On the passenger seat was a small envelope, neatly folded. No return address, no sign of who had left it. Her heart raced as she picked it up, her fingers trembling. The weight of the envelope felt wrong, there was something inside, something hard. She ripped it open, her hands clammy with sweat. Inside was a single photograph, like the one she had found before, but this one was different. It was a picture of her, standing outside the office building just a few days ago, almost identical to the moment she had just experienced. There was no way anyone could have taken this without being right behind her, without her noticing. The picture was clear and crisp, and there, in the corner of the frame, was a small message, written in dark ink, "You're too close." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A cold chill spread through her veins as the realization hit her, someone had been following her. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been watching her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to slip up. And she had no idea who they were. Panic set in as she fumbled for her phone, dialing Amanda's number in a frantic haze. The call went straight to voicemail. Her heart pounded in her ears as she called again, this time more forcefully, almost pleading. Still no answer. As Sarah stood there, frozen by fear, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow. A figure standing across the street, watching her. She didn't have to see their face to know that they were aware of her, that they knew she had seen them. Her pulse spiked. Was this one of them? Had Amanda been right all along? Was she being pulled into something much bigger, something she couldn't escape from? Without thinking, Sarah dropped the envelope into her bag and rushed into the car, slamming the door shut behind her. The engine roared to life, but she didn't drive off immediately. Instead, she sat there, staring at the shadowy figure across the street. They hadn't moved. They were still watching. The fear gnawed at her, but a part of her also felt like she was being pushed toward something she had no choice but to face. Her hands were shaking as she put the car into drive, making a sharp turn onto the main road, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, that she was overreacting. But the unsettling feeling, the knowledge that someone was tracking her every step, refused to leave her. She couldn't shake the thought that every car behind her, every person she passed on the street, might be part of a plan she didn't fully understand. By the time she reached her apartment, her mind was in a state of panic. She couldn't think straight. Every sound, every creak in the building felt like it was part of something more sinister. She locked the door behind her and rushed to her phone, desperately trying to reach Amanda again. But there was still no answer. The silence in her apartment was suffocating, and as Sarah tried to steady her breathing, she couldn't help but feel the walls closing in around her. What had Amanda been trying to warn her about? Was it too late to turn back? Was the price for uncovering the truth going to be too high? As Sarah tried to regain some semblance of control, a sudden, sharp knock at her door sent her heart into overdrive. Her entire body went rigid. The knock was loud, urgent. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she froze, unable to move. Was it them? Were they finally coming for her? She approached the door cautiously, her thoughts racing. It couldn't be anyone she knew, at least, she didn't think so. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked through the peephole, trying to make out the silhouette outside. There, standing in the hallway, was a figure she didn't recognize. They were wearing a dark jacket, their features obscured by the shadows. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. There was no response. Just silence. Then, the doorbell rang again, long and persistent. With trembling hands, Sarah backed away from the door, her mind racing. Should she open it? Should she call the police? The fear was overwhelming, but there was something deeper at play here, something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Whoever was standing outside her door wasn't just trying to scare her. They were sending a message. Before she could decide, her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. "You can't run from this. It's already too late." A cold wave of realization washed over Sarah. She wasn't just in danger. She had been trapped in a web, spun long before she ever realized it. Whoever was behind this had been watching her for far longer than she could have imagined. They had been orchestrating every move, every twist in the story. And now, the consequences were unfolding, with no way out. As she stared at the phone screen, her thoughts spiraled into a panic. Was she being played by everyone around her? Was David, Amanda, even her new colleagues, all of them, part of the plan? The uncertainty, the isolation, the fear, it was suffocating. There were no answers. Only more questions. And somewhere, deep in her mind, the dreadful thought lingered. What if there was no escape at all? The night was creeping into the early hours when Sarah, still trembling from the ominous text and the mysterious figure at her door, decided she could no longer sit idly by. She had to get answers, real answers, not just cryptic messages or half-hearted warnings. The fear gnawing at her was nearly unbearable, but she couldn't let it control her. Not now, not after everything she had uncovered, or thought she had uncovered. With a newfound determination, she grabbed her coat and headed straight for Amanda's apartment, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the woman who had been her ally would have the answers she so desperately needed. When Sarah arrived, the apartment complex was quiet, eerily so, as though it had been deserted. She'd called ahead, but Amanda hadn't answered. Sarah wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. Her hand trembled as she rang the doorbell, but when there was no answer, she felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Was Amanda in trouble? Had something happened to her? Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and called Amanda again, but the line went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through her, and she knocked harder on the door. The silence was suffocating, but just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard a faint noise behind the door, a scrape, like something heavy being moved. Sarah's heart leapt. She didn't wait. With a deep breath, she shoved the door open, only to stop short when she saw Amanda standing there, but she wasn't alone. There was another figure in the room. A tall man in a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but the moment Sarah saw him, a chill ran through her. The man's presence was unnerving, like he didn't belong. His posture was too controlled, too deliberate. "Amanda," Sarah called, her voice sharp with confusion. Amanda's face, usually composed and friendly, was now tight with tension, and for a brief second, Sarah saw something flash in her eyes, something that looked like fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the man stepped forward, blocking her path. "Sarah," he said smoothly, his voice low and calm. "You're asking too many questions." Sarah recoiled slightly, the words cutting through her like a blade. "Who are you?" she demanded, but even as the words left her lips, something in her gut told her that she already knew. The feeling settled deep in her chest, a gnawing sense that everything had been orchestrated from the start. "I'm someone who's been watching you, just like everyone else," the man replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. There was no warmth in it. "But unlike others, I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to help you, Sarah. You just don't realize it yet." The air in the room grew thicker as the truth began to take form in Sarah's mind, but she still couldn't fully comprehend it. Her mind raced, memories of the past few weeks flashing before her eyes, the interviews, the meetings, the strange messages. The photograph in the car. Amanda's cryptic warnings. It all seemed to fall into place, but not in the way she expected. Amanda stood there, her lips pressed together, avoiding Sarah's gaze. That was when it hit Sarah, and her heart dropped. The realization was sudden, like a jolt of electricity, and everything clicked in a sickening instant. The man wasn't just any stranger. He was connected to the very people Sarah had been trying to expose. But worse, Amanda had been in on it the whole time. Amanda, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. You knew. Amanda's expression softened, but there was no apology in her eyes. Just a cold, almost clinical understanding of the situation. I had to, she said quietly. I didn't want to be part of this, but there was no choice. None of us have a choice, Sarah. It was always going to happen this way. What do you mean? Sarah's breath caught, and her chest tightened. She couldn't understand how the woman she'd trusted for so long could betray her so completely. The man, still looming in the background, watched them both with an inscrutable gaze. What she means, Sarah, is that everything you've done, every step you've taken to uncover the truth, it's all part of a plan. A plan that was set in motion long before you even walked through those interview doors. The words felt like a slap to Sarah's face. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what was happening. A plan? A plan from the beginning? What plan? She asked, but her voice shook with disbelief. What are you talking about? This was supposed to be a corporate job. A CEO role. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of whatever this is. Amanda stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with an edge of sorrow. I know you didn't, but sometimes people get chosen, Sarah. And you were chosen. The truth is, you weren't meant to find out anything. But you've been digging so deep that it's become unavoidable. Sarah took a step back, her mind a whirl of confusion and panic. She tried to make sense of it all, but it felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling away. Chosen? She wasn't some pawn in someone's game. She was Sarah, a woman who had worked hard to get to where she was, a woman who trusted the people around her. But now, it felt like everything was a lie, like the life she'd been living was a carefully constructed illusion. You're not just a CEO, the man said, his voice turning darker. You're a part of something much bigger. Something that's been in motion for years. And you will understand soon enough. The finality in his tone made Sarah's blood run cold. She didn't have time to process the implications, because just as the words hit her ears, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it instinctively, and the sight that greeted her made her stomach drop to her feet. It was an incoming message from an unknown number, but the subject line sent a surge of dread through her. You're in too deep, Sarah. It's too late to walk away. But if you try to, you'll never leave. Her heart skipped a beat, the weight of the words crushing her in an instant. She wasn't just trapped. She was in danger, and not just from the man standing before her. Someone else, someone even more powerful, was pulling the strings, and they had no intention of letting her walk away from this alive. As the man's cold eyes locked with hers, Sarah finally understood the truth. There was no turning back. She had been part of this all along. Whether she liked it or not, she had been groomed for this moment. And now, the true game was about to begin. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. And she had no idea who, if anyone, she could trust. The weight of the world seemed to press down on Sarah as she stood there, holding her phone with the chilling message burning into her mind. It wasn't just the words that terrified her, it was the unspoken reality behind them. There was no way out. She was in too deep, and there was no escape from the web of deceit and manipulation that had been spun around her. But as the room seemed to close in, a sudden, burning thought pierced through her panic-stricken mind. What about the people she cared about? Were they involved in this too? Were they all part of some greater scheme, or was she simply being dragged into something that wasn't of her making? Her thoughts spiraled, and her heart raced as she considered her next move. Amanda's betrayal had torn a hole in the trust Sarah had built with everyone around her. The woman who had been her mentor, her ally, had just revealed herself to be an agent in a much larger game, a game that Sarah had never signed up for. And the man who had stood by Amanda's side, so cold and calculating, was part of the same twisted web, pulling the strings from the shadows. Sarah didn't know who to trust anymore. She couldn't go to the authorities, she wasn't even sure who the authorities were anymore. She'd learned the hard way that everyone was connected, that no one was exactly who they seemed. The feeling of being constantly watched, followed, monitored, it was suffocating. But there was one person left in her life who might hold the answers. One person who had been there for her through thick and thin, the one constant in the chaos. David. She had always trusted him, confided in him, believed in his integrity. But now, the more she thought about it, the more she began to wonder, was that trust misplaced? Could he have known more than he'd let on? Had he been playing a part in this all along? The thought made her sick to her stomach, but she couldn't ignore it. If there was any hope of escaping this nightmare, if there was even a chance of understanding what was really going on, David was the key. He was the only one who might have the answers, or at least, he was the one person who might be able to confirm if the truth had been hidden from her all along. That night, she sat in her car, parked just outside David's apartment building, staring at the glowing screen of her phone, struggling to find the words to send him a message. Part of her wanted to just leave it all behind, to run far away, disappear from everyone and everything, and hope the storm would pass. But that wasn't an option anymore. She had to face this head-on, confront the people she loved and trusted, and figure out what was really going on before it was too late. Her finger hovered over the screen, unsure whether to text him or just show up at his door. The longer she waited, the more the tension built, each passing minute like a countdown to something inevitable. Finally, she made up her mind and pressed the send button, asking him to meet her as soon as possible. When she arrived at his apartment, her heart was pounding. She tried to steady her breathing, to calm the storm inside her, but nothing seemed to help. David answered the door quickly, his expression brightening when he saw her, though there was a flicker of concern in his eyes as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Sarah, what's wrong?" His voice was gentle, the warmth in it almost comforting, but something in the back of her mind screamed that this was all too perfect, too rehearsed. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and before he could say anything else, she turned to him, her voice low but firm. "David, I need to know everything. Everything. About you. About this, about what's happening. I don't have time for games. I need to know where you stand." His face shifted for a moment, just a fleeting change in his demeanor, but it was enough to make Sarah's stomach tighten. For a split second, she wondered if he was going to lie to her, if he was going to deny everything and try to protect himself. But then, instead of saying anything, David simply walked over to the couch and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. Sarah sat down across from him, not taking her eyes off him, watching his every move. "Sarah," David began, his voice a little shaky, and Sarah's eyes narrowed. He was never shaky. Not in the way he was now. "I never wanted you to be involved in this. But I never had a choice, either." He paused, his hand resting on his knee, and Sarah waited, her pulse racing. "I was trying to protect you, but now it's too late." The words hung in the air, suffocating them both. Sarah's mind was reeling, trying to make sense of everything, but it was all too much. The walls seemed to close in around her again. David finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, fear. It was raw and real, and it made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "They've been watching you from the beginning," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The job, the promotion, the CEO role, none of it was an accident. You were chosen, Sarah. Chosen for something far bigger than what you can understand. I didn't know how to tell you, but now it's out of control. They won't stop until you play your part, or until you're out of the picture completely." Her heart stopped. Her mind spun. She felt the floor beneath her give way. Chosen? What part? The CEO role had been her dream, her chance to finally prove herself, but now it felt like a trap, a setup designed to pull her deeper into something she didn't even know existed. David continued, but his voice faltered. "I didn't want you to be part of it, Sarah. I thought I could keep you safe, but it's too late for that. You've already dug too deep. If you don't stop now, you'll never get out." The implication of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. Stop now. The idea of backing down, of walking away, of letting them win, it made her feel nauseous. But she knew, deep down, that David was right. If she kept pushing forward, if she kept digging, there was no telling what would happen. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, to run. But her heart told her something different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything she had uncovered, everything she had fought for. It was about the truth. And no matter what, she couldn't let them win. David's voice cut through her thoughts. You have a choice now, Sarah. You can walk away, and they'll leave you alone. Or you can keep going, and they'll make sure you don't survive this. There's no middle ground. No second chances. The weight of his words hung over her, heavy and suffocating. The choice was hers, but no matter what she chose, the consequences would be life-altering. Would she back down? Or would she risk it all to uncover the truth? In that moment, Sarah realized just how far gone she was and how far she was willing to go. The walls were closing in, and the stakes had never been higher. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The tension in Sarah's chest grew heavier with every passing second. David's words echoed in her mind like a persistent, haunting drumbeat. You were chosen. She couldn't grasp the full meaning of them, couldn't begin to understand why she was at the center of this nightmare. Her brain was scrambling to make sense of the mess she had been pulled into, but the more she thought, the more her stomach churned. Chosen for what? And by who? Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed about her life and career, was suddenly a lie. But just as the weight of her decisions began to crush her, the air around her shifted. The silence between her and David was unbearable, each moment a stark reminder of how little she actually understood. She could see it in his eyes, he was terrified. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something so much bigger than either of them, something that stretched far beyond the CEO position she'd fought for, beyond the company she had worked her entire life to climb in. There were forces at play here, shadowy, powerful figures who were pulling the strings and willing to sacrifice anyone who stood in their way. I can't stop now, David, she whispered, barely able to speak through the weight of it all. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand what I've walked into. David's gaze hardened, but there was something else in his eyes, guilt. It was too late. She could feel it. There was no going back from this, no walking away. This was no longer just a job or a dream, it was a war. And she was at the heart of it. His silence only confirmed her worst fears. He had been part of this from the start. She wasn't sure what he was afraid of more, what would happen to her if she kept digging, or what would happen to him if she exposed the truth. But just as Sarah was about to confront him again, her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling as she unlocked the message. They know. They know everything. It's time to act. Meet me at the warehouse. The message sent a cold wave of panic through Sarah. The warehouse. She recognized the name. It was an abandoned complex on the edge of town, a place she'd driven past countless times but never thought twice about. And yet, now it felt like the one place where the answers might finally be within her grasp, or where everything could go horribly wrong. David's face paled when she showed him the message. You can't go there. They're setting you up. It's a trap, Sarah. You don't understand. This goes so much deeper than you think. His words were barely audible, his hands trembling now too. The terror was real. But Sarah's resolve had hardened. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She couldn't back down. The fear and uncertainty might consume her, but the need for answers outweighed them both. I have no choice, David. I have to go. You've said it yourself, there's no turning back. So either you help me, or you get out of my way. The cold edge in her voice startled even her, but she wasn't about to let fear control her. Not anymore. David hesitated for a long moment, and Sarah saw his internal struggle playing out in his eyes. Finally, he stood up, his decision made. I'll help you. But we're not going in alone. We need to be prepared. Before she could protest, David was already on the phone, speaking in hushed tones with someone. Sarah barely heard the words, her mind racing. Who else was involved in this? Who else was playing a part in whatever twisted game had been set in motion around her? But just as quickly as he had made the call, David ended the conversation and turned back to Sarah, his face a mask of determination. We're going in tonight, he said, his voice low. But we need to act fast. If we don't get there first, you won't walk out of that place alive. And just like that, everything spiraled faster. There was no hesitation, no room for second guesses. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret anymore, it was about survival. The warehouse, a place that had once seemed so inconsequential, was now the battlefield. It would either reveal everything or swallow them whole. As they drove toward the warehouse, the world outside seemed to blur in the rush of headlights. Sarah's thoughts flickered between desperation and determination, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the scale of the conspiracy that had her rattled, it was the speed with which it was escalating. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered the extent of the corruption. This wasn't just a company anymore. This was an entire network, a web of powerful individuals spanning across industries and governments. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Sarah, just trying to make sense of the mess she'd been thrust into. When they reached the warehouse, it was even darker than she had imagined. The area was desolate, an abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of town, its only light coming from the flickering street lamps far off in the distance. They parked a block away, staying in the shadows as they made their way to the entrance. Every nerve in Sarah's body was screaming at her to turn back, but she couldn't. She had to know. The truth was there, hidden in the darkness, waiting for her to find it. They moved cautiously through the narrow alleyways, their steps soft against the cracked concrete. Every door they passed seemed to hold a secret, and every corner they turned felt like they were being watched. And then, just as they neared the entrance to the main building, Sarah froze. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. David turned to her, his face pale. "What is it?" Sarah's eyes were wide with shock as she saw the unmistakable figure standing by the entrance of the warehouse. It was Amanda. "What the hell is she doing here?" Sarah muttered under her breath, her pulse spiking in her throat. Amanda's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Sarah saw something in her that made her stomach turn: betrayal. The same woman who had once been her ally, her mentor, was now standing there, calm and composed, as though everything was just a game. "I knew you'd come," Amanda said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm glad you made it this far, Sarah. You're going to need all your courage for what comes next." Before Sarah could respond, a group of men emerged from the shadows behind Amanda, all wearing dark suits, their faces impassive. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the trap had already been set. She wasn't supposed to make it here, this was all part of the plan, every step of the way. David looked at her, eyes wide with panic, and then turned back to Amanda. "You're working with them?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and horror. Amanda gave him a soft, almost pitying smile. "David, you should have known. None of us had a choice." And then, with a slow, deliberate step, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, black envelope. "It's over, Sarah," Amanda said, her voice cold now. "You can't win. There's no one left to trust." In that instant, everything shifted. The world around Sarah felt like it was crumbling, the walls closing in, the stakes higher than she could have ever imagined. The game was no longer about her career, her dreams, or the CEO role. This was life and death. And it was clear now everyone was playing. Everyone was involved. The real question was whether she would survive long enough to uncover the truth. The clock was ticking. The cold air in the warehouse cut through Sarah like a blade as she stood face to face with Amanda and the silent men who flanked her. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere seemed to close in on her, the walls closing tighter with every passing second. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the broken fragments of the puzzle, but it felt like there were no more answers, only questions, and an overwhelming sense of impending doom. David stood beside her, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, but his silence spoke volumes. There was no escaping this moment. The game had changed, and she was caught in the middle, with no clear way out. Amanda's smile was cold, and her eyes glinted with something darker now: triumph. "You really thought you were in control, didn't you, Sarah? That you could dig around and uncover secrets without realizing that you were always being watched, always being guided towards the truth. But here's the thing, you don't know anything yet. You never did." Sarah felt a chill wash over her, her grip tightening around the cold metal of a pipe she had picked up earlier. It wasn't much of a weapon, but in this moment, it felt like her last shred of control. "What is this, Amanda? Why have you been doing this to me? Why me?" Sarah's voice cracked, the desperation rising in her chest as the weight of the situation finally sank in. You had the chance to be honest with me, to tell me everything, but instead, you've been playing me the entire time. Why? Amanda's lips twitched in a smile that never reached her eyes, her tone almost pitying. Oh, Sarah. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't personal. None of it ever was. You were just useful. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Useful? She couldn't process it. This wasn't about trust, about loyalty, or even the people she had known. This was something darker. This was about power. About control. And she had been a pawn in a much larger game all along. But why the CEO position? Why did you drag me into this mess? Sarah asked, her voice trembling now, more with anger than fear. What was it all for? What were you really after? Amanda stepped closer, her voice low and lethal. The CEO role was just the beginning, Sarah. It was always about what you could offer. You see, you were always meant to be more than just an employee. The higher-ups knew your potential, and they knew you had something they could use, a skill, a connection. You were chosen to lead a new initiative. To take everything that's been built and expand it. David shifted uncomfortably beside Sarah, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of the fear in his eyes. No, Amanda, he said quietly, almost pleading, you've gone too far. This isn't what we agreed on. We were supposed to stop this, not. Amanda cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. You think you have a say in this, David? You never did. None of you did. You were all just tools. Sarah's mind was spinning. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, it was all crashing down on her, and she felt like she was suffocating. She had been nothing more than a cog in a machine that was far beyond her comprehension. But even in that moment of despair, one thing was crystal clear: if she wanted to make it out alive, she had to fight back. You're wrong, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength despite the overwhelming odds. You think you've won, but you're just as trapped in this game as the rest of us. And I'm not playing by your rules anymore. Amanda's eyes narrowed as Sarah stepped forward, determined not to let fear control her any longer. You think you can change the game now? It's too late for that, Sarah. The pieces are already in place. And then, as if to prove her point, the warehouse doors creaked open with a groan, and several more figures emerged from the shadows. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was them. The faces of the people she had once trusted, the board members, the executives, each of them stepping into the dim light with expressions that ranged from cold indifference to cold calculation. She didn't know how many there were, but it was enough to make her stomach drop. The conspiracy was deeper, darker, and more pervasive than she had ever imagined. They were all in on it. Every single one of them. You see, Sarah, Amanda continued, her voice almost patronizing now, we have a vision. A vision of how things should be. And you, unfortunately, were just a stepping stone to getting there. Now, we don't need you anymore. But as Amanda took a step toward her, Sarah's instincts flared. She felt it, the shift in the air, the sudden change in the dynamic. There was something wrong here, something off about the way Amanda spoke, the way she moved. Sarah's mind raced, and then it clicked. Amanda was playing her role too well. Amanda. Sarah whispered, realization hitting her like a freight train. This whole thing. You weren't the mastermind. You were just another pawn, weren't you? For the first time, Amanda faltered, her carefully constructed facade cracking. What are you talking about? She hissed, her eyes flashing with fury. It was too late, though. Sarah had already put the pieces together. Amanda's arrogance, her role as a mentor, the way she had manipulated Sarah, it had all been a setup to make Sarah feel small, to make her believe that she was trapped in a game she couldn't escape. But the truth was far more sinister. Amanda wasn't the mastermind of the conspiracy, she was the first layer of deception, a figurehead used to keep Sarah distracted. The true villain was someone Sarah had overlooked entirely. Someone close. Her eyes darted to David. It was him. It had always been him. The fear in his eyes earlier, his subtle attempts to steer her away from the truth, the way he had looked at Amanda with hesitation, it all made sense now. He had played both sides, manipulating Sarah while keeping her close, all for a bigger, more dangerous agenda. The moment Sarah understood this, the walls of the warehouse seemed to close in on her, the weight of the truth pressing down harder than ever before. "David," she said, her voice low and dangerous, you were behind all of this, weren't you? The whole time." David's face paled, and for a split second, Sarah saw something, guilt, fear, regret, flicker across his expression. But it was too late. He had already crossed the line. His involvement in the conspiracy was undeniable now. "No, Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I didn't want this to happen. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." But it was too late for apologies. Too late for regrets. With every word that spilled from his mouth, Sarah felt a surge of rage, betrayal, and pain. Her heart ached as the reality of everything hit her. David had been the one pulling the strings all along, the one guiding her towards this moment, towards the heart of the conspiracy. But as Sarah's mind began to piece together the enormity of what she had uncovered, she realized that the truth wasn't what she had thought. This wasn't just about one man, one woman, or one company. This was about something bigger, a global network of power and control that stretched far beyond her understanding. It was bigger than any single person. In that instant, a new resolve formed within her. She wasn't just going to let them win. This wasn't about survival anymore, it was about bringing the truth to light, no matter the cost. No matter the danger. The stakes had never been higher, and Sarah knew she couldn't go back now. She was already in too deep. But one thing was certain, she would fight until her last breath, and she would make sure the truth came to light, no matter what the consequences were. Sarah stood alone in the aftermath of the chaos, the cold wind brushing against her face as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the warehouse parking lot. The police had arrived shortly after everything had unfolded, and now the building behind her was a hive of activity, filled with officers, forensics teams, and investigators scurrying in and out. The truth was out, everything had been exposed. The conspiracy, the manipulation, the web of lies that had entangled her for so long, it was all crumbling. David was in custody, along with the rest of the executives who had been in on the plot. Amanda had vanished, slipping through the cracks at the last moment, but Sarah knew that wasn't the end. The world she had known, the world of business, power, and the promise of a CEO role had all been a lie, a carefully crafted illusion that had masked a much darker reality. Yet, as the truth settled in, Sarah realized that uncovering the conspiracy wasn't the end of the journey, it was only the beginning of something much more profound. The final pieces had clicked into place, revealing not just a betrayal by those closest to her, but the existence of an entire network, an underground system of power that stretched beyond anything she could have ever imagined. It was a revelation that left her breathless, a deep ache in her chest that she couldn't shake. There was no going back. The world would never be the same for her again. But was that such a bad thing? She looked over at the wreckage of her former life, her career, her relationships, the future she thought she'd been working toward, and found that it wasn't as devastating as she had imagined. It hurt, yes, but it also felt like a release, a moment of clarity. She could breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't trapped. The weight of the unknown was gone, and though the future was uncertain, it was hers to decide. Sarah took one last look at the wreckage, the unfinished business that still lay scattered at her feet. She had a new understanding now, a sharper awareness of how easily people could be manipulated, how even the most well-meaning ambitions could be twisted into something monstrous. She had been a part of that world, had chased the dream of success and power as if it would give her everything she needed. But now, she saw the cost of that pursuit. She understood the price that others had paid, the lives that had been destroyed in the name of ambition. The ambition that had once been her driving force now seemed hollow, empty, and fraught with dangers she hadn't yet fully comprehended. But even as she felt a sense of relief, there was still a lingering unease, a question that refused to be answered. As she turned to leave the warehouse parking lot, she caught sight of something that made her pause. There, standing in the distance, was a figure she hadn't expected to see. A man she hadn't seen since the beginning of this whole nightmare, Michael, the enigmatic stranger who had first warned her, the one who had given her the cryptic message that set everything in motion. He hadn't been part of the conspiracy, but he had known about it, had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Michael's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a kind of quiet knowing that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. He didn't speak, didn't approach, but for a long moment, their eyes locked across the distance, a silent understanding passing between them. There was no question now that their paths were connected, that the conspiracy was only one part of a much larger, more intricate puzzle. And as Sarah walked away, Michael turned and disappeared into the shadows. The last part of the mystery lingered in the air between them, an unfinished story, a whisper of a larger plan unfolding just beyond the horizon. She had survived, yes. She had uncovered the truth, but there was more, much more, waiting for her. This was only the beginning. In that moment, Sarah realized something she hadn't fully understood before. The world wasn't just about what you could see, it was about what you couldn't. About the hidden forces shaping everything, the dark, unseen hand that moved behind the curtain. And no matter how much she wanted to escape it, no matter how much she hoped she could put this all behind her, she knew deep down that she was part of something bigger now. Something that had only begun to reveal its true nature. The mystery wasn't over. It would never be over. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how much she tried to move on with her life, she would always be tied to this story, this twisted, dangerous world that had once seemed so far removed from her reality. But now, it was her reality. And as she disappeared into the night, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had learned and lost, one final thought echoed in her mind. Who could she trust now? The answer, she realized, was no one. Not even herself. As the camera pulled back and the city lights flickered in the distance, the screen faded to black, leaving the audience with nothing but silence and the weight of what they had just witnessed. There was no closure here, only the promise of more. More questions. More lies. More secrets. And the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And as the credits began to roll, the question remained, would Sarah ever truly escape? The story was far from over.